We are now, the Ramchal now, last week I spoke about loving God. The week before that I spoke about fearing God. What the ideas of Avas Hashem is, Yiras Hashem, which obviously is really in many ways a fundamental concept in Judaism. The concept of fearing and loving God obviously is essential to the actual work, service that you really want to do, the avodah that you want to do, of course, with God. The Ramchal now talks about what exactly is the mechanism of how the Rebbeinu Shem interacts with the Bria. But before that, I just wanted to give somewhat of an introduction, and that is that all the acts of God, which is interesting, all the acts of the Rebbeinu Shalom, God, is basically based on three ideas. The totality of his acts is really based on three ideas. The first idea, or actually the actions that he does, is called the Anhaga. The Anhagas, his actions. And it's really based on three concepts, or three ideas. In other words, there are three reasons why God does anything vis-a-vis us. What he does vis-a-vis himself is unknown, but vis-a-vis us, there are three concepts involved. The first one is called the Anhog of Kiyum. That is, what are the acts that God does, the actions, to create the entire creation? And obviously he had a specific idea in mind, and what he does therefore is he creates creation, the existence and so on, of everything. And the way creation is made is that it is made exactly to accommodate his purpose. You see, in other words, what he does is he creates the staging. It's like the guy, you know, like it's like a play with they have to create the stage where all the characters do their stuff. You see, so therefore the Anhagas Hakim really is those actions that God does to create everything, which is the entire spiritual universe, the entire physical universe, the whole concept of the living entities in the physical universe, the concept of man, obviously, which is obviously central and so on, and of course the concept of Jews, the concept of the Torah. All of this is a result of what's called the Anhagas Hakim. And the Anhagas Hakim means those actions which he takes to bring the universe to its fulfillment. Kiyum, Pekayim, where the universe creation will actually come to its fulfilled purpose. And that's obviously almost, as far as we're concerned, almost an infinite amount of actions that he does. And what's important to remember, although it's very hard for us to understand, that everything he does in the Anhagas Hakim, in the actions that he takes to bring the universe to a fulfilled state, everything he does is only for that, which means that no matter what you see around you, okay, has its purpose in advancing the purpose of creation. Nothing that he made does not advance the purpose in some way. In other words, if you see a tree with a wind blowing the tree a certain way, right? Or the wind direction is this from the north instead of from the south, right? And therefore the leaves are being blown in a certain direction. That must be to fulfill the purpose of creation. When you see that there are 300,000 species of beetles, not beetles, but species of beetles, there's trillions and trillions of species of beetles itself, then every species is necessary in order for creation to come to its purpose. Not only that, a tiger, for instance. Why does a tiger even exist, or why does a tiger look the way it does? Again, to advance the purpose of creation. Now, we have no idea what all this means. We barely understand how we advance the purpose of creation, right? But to understand how the almost infinite variety of the physical universe and each thing will advance the purpose is completely unknown to us. It is beyond human comprehension, really, to know how every single entity, even a grain of sand, has to be located in its place on the beach in order to advance the purpose. We have no idea what that means. But that is the principle, that everything that exists must exist in its place, at its time, right, in order to advance the purpose of creation. And it's interesting that, there are species, for instance, that are extinct, or they go extinct. And the idea for that is because they are no longer necessary for the advancement of the purpose. And we have, of course, that doesn't mean we can kill everything, of course not, But if God allows a species to cease to be, right, then what that means is that they are no longer necessary to advance the purpose of creation. It's a very important idea. How singular-minded is God, in the sense that everything that exists only exists because it can advance the purpose at whatever level. And that if it doesn't advance the purpose, it ceases to exist. And like I say, we have no idea of in terms of how we can identify the purpose of anything, really, in terms of everything that exists. That's a fundamental principle of emunah, of belief. That's how I use the word tight is existence, where everything matters, everything is important, and everything has a purpose. So that's the concept of Hanogas HaKiyum, which means these are the acts that God does to advance, to allow the purpose of creation to unfold. The second series of actions that God does is God responds to the actions of man. One of the things that Hanogas HaKiyum allowed is that mankind has free will. Jews have free will, Goyim have free will. Everybody, all mankind has free will. And that was part of the plan, and therefore, obviously, the reason why we have free will is that we can be held responsible for our actions. Because if we don't have free will, we are not responsible for our actions. Therefore, what free will does, it makes us a true cause of whatever happens. And if we are because we have free will, a true cause of what happens, then we are responsible for the actions that, or the consequences, or the effect that takes place. And therefore, if it's a bad effect, then we are culpable, we are guilty of doing something wrong. And if it's a good thing, then we are culpable in a positive sense, and therefore we get reward. You see? Because we truly have caused that effect. This is all part of the Hanogas HaKiyum. The second series of actions that God does is called Hanogas HaMishpat. What's Hanogas HaMishpat? It is those series of actions that the Ribono Shel Olam does, that God does, in response to somebody's actions. Mishpat. In other words, basically what happens, if a person does good, he gets rewarded. If he does bad, he gets punished. That's the basic formula. Although that itself becomes very complex. What's called good, what's called bad, and so on. But the main idea is that the response that God has toward the acts of man, insofar as he uses free will, those acts which God responds to, because it's based on judgment of that person, is called the Hanogas HaMishpat. Okay? The actions that God takes in response to judgment of man's acts based on his free will. That's it. The third series of actions that God takes is something else, which in many ways is a tremendous chesed, act of kindness that God does to us. Think about it. If a person has free will, then he could, if a person has free will, then he could do bad all day long, 24/7, because he has free will. You see, not only the person, it's possible for mankind to sin 24/7, right? Because they have free will. But if they did that, what would happen? That means there would be no Olam Haba, because everybody's being chote, everybody's sinning. So therefore, what that would mean is that the will of God would be completely frustrated. Because what God wants is to be an Olam Haba. He wants a future world, right? And he wants basically mankind specific. It's certainly Jews to be an Olam Haba. Of course, he would like all mankind to be an Olam Haba, but they'll exclude themselves. You see, but there are goyim, of course, who will get Olam Haba. But the main idea is that if a person has free will, then he could sin 24/7, and therefore he can frustrate the will of God, which is really incredible when you think about that. You see. Now you're going to say to me, well, that's highly unlikely that everybody's going to sin 24/7. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, right? I mean, what's the probability of that? You would argue with me and say, there's no probability for that. Come on. You mean everybody's going to sin 24/7, right? And therefore the will of God will be frustrated? Well, guess what? It actually happened by Noach and the flood. Everybody obviously sinned 24/7, right? And God decided, well, enough is enough, right? Right? These guys are destroying my entire desire to bring the future world, right? I want to wipe out the whole world, and he did. So the flood of Noach is a classic example that because man had free will, right, they sinned 24/7, or certainly they sinned enough, where the bunch who said enough is enough. Correct? So you actually see that it did happen, right? So forget about your probability, right? So what the Hashem does is he says, listen, I don't care. Mankind cannot frustrate my will. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a series of actions, and this is called the Anhugas HaYichud, that guarantees that the world must have a kiyum, and there must be somebody in Olam Haba, or whatever the population is, right? That system, those series of actions that God takes, that guarantees that there will be an Olam Haba, that guarantees that this world will be rectified, which means that I will come back, tikkun, right, must happen. Even though, and the incredible thing about that is even though man has free will, right, doesn't make a difference. These acts of God are so profound that somehow they get around the free will of man, and even if they sin, it's still possible that there should be Olam Haba and everybody should be in it. You see. Now, one of the main ways that this Hanhoga acts is through the concept called suffering. You see. So because of suffering and pain and all that kind of stuff, God is able to subvert the world and allow people to get into Olam Haba even if they sinned. Now, these series of actions called Anhogas HaYichud, why is it called Yichud? Because justice doesn't say, hey, wait a minute. Justice says, if you did good, you get good. If you did bad, you get bad. Justice doesn't say, we got to rehabilitate you, right? That's not justice, right? Justice doesn't say, well, if you did bad, I'm going to give you a second chance. No, right? You did bad, you get punished, and that's the end of the story. You see, so Anhogas HaYichud, therefore, the one who could do this series of actions of Anhogas HaYichud, which is called the actions of the Supreme One, right, has to be above justice. He has to be a being that can completely suspend justice. He has to be so high above that he has to be so supreme that he can suspend justice. That's why this Hanhoga, these series of actions, is called Hanhogas HaYichud. It is the series of actions by one who is above everything. The Yichud. He is the one and only. So he can do it. Yeah.
We having questions in this year?
Yeah, it's a class, not a year.
Clear. So
you see, you're now taking advantage of the fact that it's a class.
I'll take advantage of
exactly, that's exactly what.
The whole idea of the Nahamadik Hisufa.
Nahamadik Sufa, yes.
Because really, everything is meaningless except that I earned it through my own choice. So this Hanhogas HaYichud seems to destroy the concept of the Nahamadik Hisufa, and all my actions are rendered meaningless. I'm at Disneyland now. I get to go on the ride. Someone paid my ticket. Big deal. Who cares?
Okay.
It's not my Olam Haba. I didn't do anything to really deserve it.
Yes, but I want to tell you something which is interesting. Hanhogas HaYichud doesn't work for everybody. Remember, somebody has to be in Olam Haba. That doesn't. But there are many people that will not be in the future world, right? So where's Hanagas HaYichud for them? It's not. You see, you have to be worthy of Hanagas HaYichud. That even if God sees you slipping, He somehow is going to interact with you and get you straight. But He doesn't do it for everybody, because there's some people like I'll give you an example. Hitler Yamach Shemoy V'Zichroi, right? There's no Hanagas HaYichud for him. You know what I'm saying? On the contrary, we cannot even comprehend what this man is, whatever soul the guy had, you know. And so we cannot even comprehend this suffering that he's going through, you see. And there's no Hanagas HaYichud for him. Hanagas HaYichud is a privilege. You have to earn it. But what it does do is that there's somebody that's privileged, you see. So therefore it will work, you see. In fact, there's a whole history of Hanagas HaYichud, which I'm not going into now, which in many ways the premise of Sukkahs, which I'm not going to go into. But Hanagas HaYichud is not for everybody, you see. But it does guarantee that there will be a future world, and there will be a population in the future world there. By and large, it guarantees that there will be Jews in Olam Haba. Therefore, almost every Jew that ever was created or lived, basically, Ramchal says, although the Ramchal says something different, but basically every Jew will be in Olam Haba, because as they say in English, by hook or by crook, God's going to get him in. You see, although the Ramchal says later that there's a minority of a minority of a minority, apparently he felt, even of Jews that will not get Olam Haba, because their sins have been so grievous. I mean, you're talking about the Jews, for instance, you know, that were guilty of Mesira. They informed on the government, and then the government went and slaughtered out an entire village or whatever, you know, which happened. You know, unfortunately, there have been many Jews over the centuries that have really hated the Jews, and they have caused them incredible harm. It's hard to believe that a Jew can do this to another Jew, but there have been Jews like that, you see. So Ramchal states later on, Derech Hashem, that there are Jews that will not get Olam Haba, but they are miyat shebemiyat. They are an extreme minority, you know. But everybody else, they'll get Olam Haba, and God just brings them back. That's one of the purposes of Gilgal. You see, you know, it's funny. In the beginning, everybody lived to what, 800-900 years, right? Because in the beginning, what the Hashem wanted is that everybody should do the tikkun. You have one lifetime, you do the tikkun, and that's it. So it would take 800 years, you know. But obviously what happened is that, you know, once you started off bad, you continued that way for the next 700-800 years. So what was the whole point? You know what I'm saying? All it did was give you 800 years to do terrible evil. So Hashem said, no. Well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to split 800 years into 9 lifetimes. You see? So if you really turn rotten in one lifetime, there's a chance in the second lifetime maybe you'll straighten out. You see? So the concept that we don't live 800 years is really very good for us. You see? Because if we made a mistake and went down the wrong path, we'd be doing that for 800 years. That's not good, right? So therefore, what the Hashem has now done is he has divided up lifetimes, and that's the concept of Gilgal, where if you mess up in one lifetime, right, then you come back for a second lifetime, and then hopefully the odds are that you'll do better. At least, you know, so that's one of the important ideas of Gilgal, and that's why man changed from 900 years, right, to 100, 120, whatever, you know. Some guys don't even make it past 20, you know, for whatever reason, because the Hashem says, hey, whatever, I mean, there's many cheshbonis and so on. Anyway, ideas and reckonings.
Why you said before that Hitler Yamashmo is suffering? Why who's somebody who's proudly destined for Ibud? What's the point of him suffering at all? Why not just Ibud and be done with it?
That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, that's what it would seem. But, you know, let's put it this way, you know, if a guy like, you know, Hitler, Yamach Shemay V'Zichroi, I mean, what this guy was beyond belief. Him or Stalin, you know, or all the famous, you know, or that crazy Mao Zedong, that crazy Chinese guy who killed 100 million Chinese. I mean, these guys are like the cherry on the cake of evil, right? No, because what the Hashem decided is, no, that's too easy for them. Yeah, so there'll be a judgment in heaven, and they'll decide, okay, Mao Tse, he killed 100 million people. What'd you do this for? Well, whatever the crazy idiot is going to say, right? And what are you going to say? Okay, we decided you've got to be annihilated. Okay, I had my fun, it's over. Oh no, it doesn't work that way. Justice demands. What is justice really? Justice says every act creates a react. What law is that in physics? Newton's third law? For every action there's always what? An equal and opposite reaction. What does that law sound like? Justice. It's really what it is, right? Newton, third law, right? For every principle in Judaism, there's always a physical principle. That's the physical principle of justice, There's no such thing as an act and there's no react, you see. And it's equal and opposite. That's what mishpat is, you see. You did A, you must go through B, you see. And therefore, these guys did, compared to, because Hitler lived in Yamach Shemoy, 56 million people died. We have no idea what this guy did. I mean, it was 6 million Jews, which is enough to condemn him to who knows what, right? But 56 million people died in that World War II because this guy decided, right, that he wants a third Reich. Now, it's not just 56 million people. I mean, it's incalculable what the damage of that, right? But it's their whole lives was snuffed out. What each one could have done, guy's 18 years old, he goes joins the army, right? And he dies, right? What?
Normandy.
Yeah, Normandy, right? I mean, how people died in Normandy, and so on, right? So his whole life is snuffed out. What kind of good deeds could he have done with his life, right? And then if he had married and would have had kids, and they had kids, atzif kaladuris, until the old generations, right? He is responsible not just for their death, but he is responsible for every life and what it would have been until the end of all time, you see. And not only that, it's not just the people who died. What about the wives of the people who died, and the mothers and the fathers, and the agony? When you add it up, you do not believe the sum of anguish and agony and suffering that this one man did while he was alive. You see, the only one who can calculate that is God. And the only one who could recompense this guy is God. You see. And he will give him an exact measure of what he did, which is beyond belief. Fortunately, no human could suffer that and live. Well, Hitler's dead, you see, and the neshama, God will keep it alive, right? As long as he needs to what's called expiate what he did. And we don't even realize, we don't even know what that is. Because it is justice, yeah. You can't just say, okay, I had my fun, okay, I thought it would work, and okay, take me out. Oh no, you're not going out, you see. Why do you think it's interesting. Why do you think that there is a third world? You ever notice? The world is divided into three sections. There's the superpowers, which used to be the United States and Russia, but Russia's no more superpower, although Putin is trying to act as if he was, right? But he's not, right? The US is the greatest nation now, but they used to be superpowers. The second status of nations is called the industrial nations, mostly Europe and Canada and America, and so on, And then there's the third world. What characterizes the third world is incredible poverty, isn't it? Tremendous poverty. We don't even realize the poverty, You go to India, I think the places where a guy makes, $100,000 a year, something like that. It's astounding, what these guys make, In Africa, the whole Africa is third world, right? A great deal of Asia is third world, right? South America, forget about, right? Why? Why is there such poverty? Because what the Baruch Hashem has done is very interesting. And this is what you see in terms of the compensation. What he has done, most of the world is chayav misa. You don't realize that. Most of the world is subject to the death penalty. And most of the world is Gilgulim, reincarnations, right? Take a look at what did the Assyrians do? The only people they killed, the Assyrians or the Romans or the Greeks, right? Or the Babylonians, there are so many people that they killed, or there's so many people that they created incredible anguish, butchered, So what does God do? He brings them all back. Where? He brings them back into the third world. Why? Because there are 4 things that are equivalent to death. Tomorrow says that, right? 4 things. Poverty is one. Means if somebody is extremely poor, really extremely poor, that is the equivalent, it's called a judicial equivalent. That is equivalent of a death penalty. Right? Why? Because when you're dead, you can't do anything, and when you're poor, you can't do anything. That's the equivalent, right? The second one is blind. Somebody's blind, that is the equivalent of a death penalty, because if you're blind, eyesight is obviously the most important sense. If you're blind, you're extremely limited in terms of what you can do, right? So blindness, right? Then a woman who has no children is also considered a death penalty, right? I'm not judging anybody, don't get me wrong, I'm just saying this is what the Gemara says, right? Why? Because if she has no kids, then who's going to carry on her name? It's as if she lived and vanished, you see? And then somebody who has tsuras. It's not leprosy, which is a big mistake, but some type of skin discoloration, whatever, but it clearly is some type of an entity, even if it's not a disease. But it would meant that you had to go chutz lamachna. You had to go outside the camp and you had to be alone. So that's death, because you can't interact with society. You're alone, you see? Nobody will have anything to do with you. Those 4 things. Well, God's not going to make the world blind, right? He's not going to give them tsuras, right? And he's not going to make every woman childless who has to die, right? But what he will do is poverty. There you are. All those people that are poor, I'm not judging them, don't get me wrong. Nobody really knows. I'm not saying everybody is poor or everybody who lives in South America is because they're subject to death. I don't know. But based on what the Gemara is saying, I can understand why there's a death penalty, why there's poverty, you see. Because most of the people of mankind have to get the death penalty, you see. And therefore, they come back as a very poor person, you see. So there you are, justice. A guy can't all of a sudden do something and say, well, I had my fling, and now I'm out of here. Yeah, you're out of here. You're out of here, but you're coming back, right? And you're going to be out of here. You won't know what hit you, you see. And that's why, you see, the poverty of the third world is in order to compensate or it's retribution in many ways, because these people are all reincarnations, you see. So that's what it is. So as I was answering your question, so not everybody gets the Anhagas HaYichud, you see. It's only, there are people that have to pass a certain threshold, you see, which is interesting. How does God decide who gets the future world and who doesn't? Interesting, So what it depends, obviously, is on the deeds of mankind. A person's deeds, So if a person's deeds outweigh his bad deeds, that means not only the quantity of good deeds, but the quality of good deeds. Because sometimes one good deed can be worth more than 20 other good deeds. Depends on how much you have to give up and what you did and so on, But if a person, when he dies, or at the end of time I should say, because there are 3 judgment periods. When a person dies, when the person dies is 1. Actually, Rosh Hashanah is 1. When a person dies is 2. And the end of the world, the great Yom Hadin HaNor VaGodol VaNoira, the end of time when everybody will be judged as to their status for eternity, and that is a frightening time, And for somebody who basically has 50% or more, he will survive. And for that person, then God introduces the Anhagas HaYichud that he has to survive, you see. And therefore, God will do all kinds of things to get him to survive. So to answer your question, it's not everybody. that has the Anhagas Yichud that will guarantee his survival. You see. But in any case, that's a major idea, that there is this Anhagas Yichud, which is the actions that God takes to guarantee the survival in the future world. Not only here, it's in the future world that this person will survive. But again, he has to pass a certain threshold. Below a certain threshold, it won't work for him, which is bad news. You see. That doesn't mean he won't come back as a Gilgul to give him another chance. But then it's up to his efforts. You see, that Anhagas Yichud does something to him, which makes him eligible against his own will, which is very important. You see. But also, one of the ideas of Anhagas Yichud, since I'm talking about that, is that one of the ideas of Anhagas Yichud is that the acts that God does is completely, in many ways, completely unintelligible and illogical to us. We don't understand. We don't understand, but Anhagas Yichud really takes place, not only through history, but in the end of time. We are in the midst of Anhagas Yichud. Most of the acts that God does is Anhagas Yichud. When you look at a tzaddik and he suffers, and you look at a Russia who is like, he's like, it's a billionaire or whatever, right? You are looking at many ways the Anhagas Yichud for the tzaddik. The Holocaust is Anhagas Yichud. You see, it is those things that God has to do in order for everybody to survive in the future world. You see, and therefore the acts to us is completely mysterious. It is mysterious. It's unknown because there's no logic behind it. In terms of the concept called justice, it doesn't look like justice. Like, why? You see, it's something which is beyond our comprehension in terms of why. These are the acts of Anhagas Yichud. So I want to just say, when it says manur ma'asecha and so on, what that means is that we cannot comprehend those series of actions that God does in order to guarantee that you will survive and that Jews will survive in the future world. It's beyond human comprehension. However, all is not lost. Why? Because in the end of time, it will be explained. Everything that God did, either why he created the world as it is, which is Anhagas HaKiyum, got that? Or why, Anhagas HaMishpat, why God did what he did to you. Hey, I'm waiting for put a quarter in the meter. Is that what they take, or they take more now? I don't know. I put my hand in my pocket, take a quarter. I came out with a nickel. Why did I do that? Even that Yisurim is judged. That you had to come in and put your hand in your pocket, come out with a nickel instead of a quarter. That's also judgment, as little as it is. Of course, the guy hopes that he's going to put his hands in his pocket many times and call a nickel. It's better that than going to the hospital for some major surgery. You know what I'm saying? But even that's based, even that will be explained. So someday Anhagas HaMishpat will be explained. And someday Anhagas HaYichud will be explained also. We will know. You will know everything. In fact, it's going to be a video. They're going to sit you down, right? And they're going to play a video for you. Your life. There used to be a TV show 50, 60 years ago. It was called This Is Your Life. In fact, I remember the guy who used to do it. I think his name was Ralph Edwards. Wow, I can't believe I remember this. So it was an interesting show, It was cute, What happened is that a guy would come on, right? And they pick, I don't know how they got the guy, but they would pick somebody in the audience. I know how they got the guys, Okay, So you'll be the contestant next week, right? The guy would come on, and all of a sudden they would bring out friends that he hasn't seen in 40 years. And you see this guy like he's going crazy, They're bringing out friends and guys, classmates, right? Guys he graduated with in college, professors, business partners that he had 40 years ago, that he hasn't seen in 40 years, and they would bring all these guys out. Well, I think it was an hour show, I don't remember, and this guy would like he's plotting. He's plotting. and this was called "This Is Your Life." I mean, I'm trying to understand what the object of this program was, other than the advertisements. But it was a very interesting show because it was an interesting, as I say, chap, an interesting concept. Take a guy and bring back his life, or like he hadn't seen his sister in 48 years, and all of a sudden his sister come on the show, and like he was about to faint. I mean, it was really dramatic. In the end of time, we're all going to sit for "This Is Your Life." You see, and not only are they going to bring out, the alter bubba, the grandmother and so on and so forth, and your business partners and your wife and your kids and all that kind of stuff, right? They're going to bring back all your gilgulim. And you say, "Oh, I don't believe I was this kind of guy, 400 years ago, and you're going to sit there and watch it, and while you're watching this, it's going to explain every single thing you did and why it happened and what God's mishpat was and what the yichud was to make sure that you can survive in Olam Haba." Right? That's what we can all look forward to. This is your life. Right? And therefore, we will have everything answered. And therefore, when God renders the judgment ultimately, right? Hopefully when you're in Olam Haba, not only you're in or you're out of Olam Haba, but at what level are you in or you're out? This is the ultimate decision, Hopefully when you do have that decision and so on and so forth, you will, in the end, you will shake your head and say, "Yes, I deserve this. This is true justice," what God did and so on, And that's the great show of mankind that will take place in the year 6000, the great Yom Hadin HaGadol V'Hanora, the awesome judgment day, and so on, But so these are basically the three actions that God does in how He responds to creation, and they explain many ideas in terms of what they represent and so on. But that's it. These are the three principles that determine God's acts. It's that simple. I hate to use the word simple, but it's that clear and so on. Any questions?
Can you just recap just what the three, not explanation wise, just how does the mishpat?
Well, the Hanagas there's Hanagas HaKiyum, which is the acts that God does to bring about the entire situation that man will be tested. Okay. That's the whole creation. The Malachim, the Shama, there's the physical man, what I'm saying? There's the Torah, the commandments, there's Jews, there's Goyim, there's North America, South America, everything. That's Hanagas HaKiyum. Hagas HaMishpat is since you've been given free will, right? Then the response that they have toward your free will, right? Mishpat, that's the second series of actions that God does. And the third series of actions is the concept of guarantee. It's called a backup plan. It's a contingency plan. That if you somehow are not making it, but you are worthy in a certain sense, but you're just not making it, so that will enter in your life to sort of like assist you in getting into Olam Haba. But it's yichud because justice does not demand that behavior, you see, because this is truly rehabilitation. And one of the main places that you see this, when it says after Shemais, when the Jews got out of Egypt, it says, "Ani Hashem Rifecha," I am God your healer. What does it mean, your healer? What do you mean, your healer? It doesn't say I'm God your judge. I am God your healer. That's rehabilitation. What does a doctor do? Right? A doctor heals you from all the diseases or illnesses that you have. So therefore, when God says, I'm your healer, He's saying a very, very important thing. He's saying that my job is to rehabilitate you, not to punish you. You see, and in the end, that idea means that the role of God, is judgment, which it is, because that's what justice is. But if you're not making it, right, then my job is that I will heal you. Don't worry, I will get you into Olam Haba. That's what Rafecha means, you see. That God is now not just a judge, but His role also is that He's a healer. Very important idea. which makes us has a certain amount of confidence. But in any case, these are the three acts of God. You see. Now the Ramchal is going to now begin talking, now that you have this background, which is really very important. What determines what happens to everybody, really? All these ideas, Hanogas Akiyim, the Mishpat, the Yichud, and so on, what determines what happens to a person? So Ramchal lays it down in a very simple formula. What determines everything, he calls the Ha'ora of God. It's called Ha'oras Ponev. You see, when God faces you, that's where he describes it. When he faces you, and he sends forth a shefa means an influence, but what it really means is that he sends forth, imagine the closest thing that you can call it is energy. What the Ransham does is he sends forth a power, a force, you see, and that force does everything. It does everything. It creates you, maintains your existence, right? And it will reward you, it'll punish you. And that's called the Ha'oras Ponev. When God shines his face upon you, as it says in, the Birchas Kohanim, Yo Hashem Ponev Elecha V'Chaneka, that God should, enlighten, face you, and see. So what's called Ha'oras Ponev is the shefa, is the energy or the force that God will emit from himself, so to speak, and that does everything. It creates, it maintains existence, it determines the quality of your life. You see, so that's what does everything. When God turns away his face, so to speak, then all of a sudden he is not giving the energy, at least to benefit you and so on. Then what's happening is that there's energy indirectly from the Satan, you see, that's now doing a lot of bad stuff to you and so on. And because he can prosecute you, and ultimately speaking, then the Bezdin has that energy, so to speak. It's indirectly that they will now employ to do that which you deserve, which ultimately, of course, is the concept of punishment. So you have the Ha'oras Ponev, which is the enlightenment of God's face, and you have the Hester Ponev, when God conceals his face, you see, which means that he will not send energy that benefits you. On the contrary, there's energy that's sent, obviously, that will put you in very difficult situations. So that's therefore what does it. It's interesting, just a little Kabbalistic idea. We know that the world was created with 10 spheres, 10 emanations. These are the elemental forces that God uses to do everything. Okay? But really he created two sets of elemental forces. And they are described in Kabbalah as spheres the Igulim, circular spheres, and spheres the Yoshe, straight or linear spheres. It's interesting. And this is all Kabbalistic and so on. I bring this down for a certain reason. Why two? Because the spheres create everything and they maintain the existence. You see. But the sphere is the Igulim, which means it's a circle. It's described geometrically as a circle, right? A circle has no beginning or end. Any point on that circle is a beginning or an end. You see. So the job of these spheres, okay, is to maintain, to create and to maintain the existence of. That's all they do. They do not change the quality of your life at all. They just put you into existence and they keep you there. That's what their responsibility is. And they're called the spheres, the Igulim, the spheres of circularity. The spheres, the Yoshe, the linear spheres, are the spheres that determine the quality of your life. Not just your existence, but how I exist. Now, the spheres of circularity cannot be influenced by us. You're here and that's it. The spheres of Yosha, they can be influenced by our acts. So we ultimately influence the spheres of Yosha, of linearity, you see. And based on our deeds, we either bring the shefa, the force or the energy, down to us, the spiritual energies down to us, and therefore we have a great life. Or if we sin, right, then they recede, so to speak, and then we don't have such a great life, obviously, right? Then it's a whole negative experience and so on. So you have two sets of 10 spheres, you see? Now, where do you see that? Remember, the human body has what? The human form, right, is really a model of the entire creation, you see. Now, since God does everything with those 10 spheres of Yosha, therefore we have 10 fingers. How do we interact with the world? With the fingers, right? Everything we do has 10, right, is with your hands. You know what I'm saying? So therefore, just like God uses 10 fingers, so to speak, right? Then we have fingers because we are a model of creation. That's why we have 10 fingers. But those fingers represent what? The linear spheres. What's called the spheres, the Yosha. Yosha means straight, right? Right? But wait a minute, but there are also 10 spheres, right, that enable us to exist. What are they? 10 toes. 10 toes. You ever notice your toes? No. Why do we have 10 toes? It's interesting, isn't it, right? They're also 10. And don't they look like fingers? They sure do, right? But really they're short and you don't do anything with them. What do they enable you to do? Walk, right? And be stable. You know, the toes enable you to walk and they give you stability on the planet. You see, isn't that interesting? So the toes in man represents the spheres, the igulim. You see, just like the spheres, the igulim, the circular spheres, right? They create you and maintain your existence. And the toes allow you to be stable on the earth. Their job is to do what? To maintain the existence, that's all. It means to create you and maintain your existence. That's their job, right? So the 10 toes, 10 spheres, they are toes, you see? Because they enable you to stand and walk, right? Just, right? To enable you just to keep moving, so to speak, to keep going. But the 10 fingers represent the 10 spheres of Yosha, linearity, right? And these, you can do anything you want, you see? Same ideas, you see? So the 10 spheres of linearity, right? They are the ones that give us how we exist, not the fact that we exist. It's interesting how the human body, and the whole body can be interpreted as a model of creation. It's astounding how it does. But I'm just giving you two of these metaphors, you know, models and so on, you know. But the idea is that everything is created, exists, everything that happens is because God sends forth of the Yosha and also the Gulam and so on, you know. There's tremendous force or there's tremendous energy. And of course, the job of this, of course, is to increase the power of the spheres. 10 fingers. What was that? Yosha, yeah. Yeah. You know. That's why when you do a bad deed, some guy looks at you and says, Yosha? What he's really saying is you just used the 10 spheres of Yosha, right? And you did a bad deed. So he says, Yosha? That's a joke. Anyway. But in any case, yeah. So therefore, these 10 spheres of linearity, they determine everything that happens. And the way to access the power of these spheres is, of course, through the mitzvahs. If you do the will of God, whatever that is, and 3 weeks ago, I went into the whole concept of the avodah and the extensions of doing whatever will bring you to mitzvahs and whatever. So this will increase the energy of the spheres and give you incredible results in terms of your life. You know, you'll have money, you'll have health, you know, you have kids, everything, you know. It just does everything for you, you know. However, if you sin, obviously that will not happen, right? And then you have all kinds of problems and so on, right? And obviously there are many problems a person can have. And therefore, that's if you don't do the mitzvahs. So obviously, the key, of course, is to bring down as much shefa as possible, which is this energy and so on. And obviously to avoid having a tremendous amount of hester, which obviously is very, very, very important. So, you know.
So a person who has to go through Anhagas HaYichud,
Yeah.
let's say it's tzaddik.
Yeah.
The person in this level is a tzaddik.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he has to go through, because of whatever reason, he still needs to go through Anhagas HaYichud. So all that shefa that's hitting him,
Yeah.
where's it going? Because he's having a hard life.
With what?
Where's it going? That shefa that's coming to him.
It's going to him.
It's going to him, but he still has to go through Anhagas HaYichud.
Yeah.
For a different problem. So he's having a hard life, but he's
Yeah.
still having shefa.
Yeah, because the shefa always comes from God. The question is this a reflection of his looking at you, ha'ara, or is this a question of him not looking at you,
But
and that's hester, concealment?
Hashem is putting him through a period of Anhagas HaYichud.
Yes,
in order that
okay.
he gets into Olam Haba.
Yeah, okay. But that
He's
was,
still doing mitzvahs now.
yeah, okay. So
All this
you can have both coming at the same time. You know, in certain.
But at the end of the day, he's having a bad life.
Well, you know, I mean, but there's some good things happening to him, aren't
The
there?
question is that extra shefa that he's not getting stored? Or is it?
I'm not getting you.
The question is, he's having a bad life right now, but he's doing mitzvahs.
Yes.
He's getting good shefa, but there's an Anhagas HaYichud that says he cannot get a good life.
So there's both.
Even with the shefa.
Yes, there's a duality happening. Yeah.
So
Part of it is
that's wasted?
hester.
I mean, what's
No, part of it is hester, and the other part is ha'ara. You see?
how are the good times and that's just the bad times?
Yeah, but they can happen simultaneously, right? In one day, a guy can, get a great job, and all of a sudden, one day, he can bury somebody. Right? It happens all the time. You know what I'm saying? Good news and bad news can happen in the same hour. You know what I'm saying? So therefore, it's each one has its own type of relationship
The
to
shefa
God.
has nothing to do with Schar Olam Haba.
No, it would no. No, there is. We don't get schar Olam Haba until Olam Haba. Has nothing to do with Olam
The
Haba.
shefa is not talking about the Schar Olam Haba.
No. The chef is to get you to Olam Haba. You know, to bring down enough energy, enough force to get you into Olam Haba. You see, but there's really something else going on, because if God faces you and you have that energy, which means you have a good life, what it really means is that you get close to Him.
Right.
That's really what it is.
Okay.
Ha'ora means that you are close to Him. You see, hester means you're far from Him.
Right.
That's really the upshot of all of this. So therefore, if God is looking at you favorably, that means there's a ha'ora. That means there's a light that goes upon you. Therefore, you are close to Him. You see. But the reverse, when God looks away, so to speak, then you are distant from Him, and therefore this is what happened. But they can both happen to a person simultaneously, or just at different times, you know, which is what happens and so on, you know. Anyway, okay, so this is so far the concept of how things really happen and so on, and I will continue about it next week.